The smoke still hung in the air 3 days after the fire had consumed the Thompson homestead. A bitter reminder that death moved swiftly through the Texas plains in the summer of 1878. Ethan McCready had been riding past the blackened ruins when his horse suddenly refused to go further, pawing at the ground and whinnying with an agitation that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He dismounted, boots crunching on charred wood, and that was when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost convinced himself it was the wind whistling through the skeletal remains of what had once been a proud ranch house. But the wind did not weep, and the wind did not call for help in a voice scraped raw by smoke and desperation. Ethan moved carefully across the unstable floor, testing each step before committing his full weight. The main level had collapsed in several places, revealing the crawlspace beneath. He dropped to his knees at the edge of one gaping hole, peering down into the darkness. "Hello? Someone down there?" The response came as a cough followed by a whispered plea. "Please, help me." His heart hammered against his ribs as he worked to pry up more of the burned floorboards, the wood crumbling in his hands. The opening was barely wide enough for a person to fit through, but as his eyes adjusted to the dimness below, he could make out a figure huddled in the corner of the foundation. A woman, covered in ash and blood, her dress torn and filthy. She raised one hand toward him, and he could see that her fingers were raw and bleeding from where she had tried to claw her way out. "I have got you," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the shock coursing through him. "Hold on just a moment longer." He lowered himself through the opening, dropping the 6 feet to the dirt floor of the crawlspace. The air was thick and acrid, making his eyes water. The woman had collapsed again, her breathing shallow and labored. She was young, he realized as he knelt beside her, perhaps in her early 20s. Her dark hair was matted with dirt and dried blood, and angry burns marked her arms and neck. "Can you move?" he asked gently, touching her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open. They were a striking green, even dulled by pain and exhaustion. "I tried," she whispered. "The floor fell. I could not get out." "I am going to lift you now," Ethan said. "It is going to hurt, but I need you to stay with me." She nodded weakly, and he slipped his arms beneath her, one under her shoulders and one under her knees. She was lighter than he expected, her body trembling against his chest as he stood. Getting her through the opening proved difficult. He had to pass her up first, settling her as gently as possible on the burned floor above before hauling himself up after her. The moment he emerged, she tried to sit up, but her strength gave out and she fell against him. Ethan caught her, pulling her close and holding her steady as tremors racked her frame. "You are safe now," he murmured. "I have got you." She turned her face into his shirt, and he felt hot tears soaking through the fabric. He held her there in the ruins of her home, this stranger who had survived what should have killed her, and something shifted in his chest. He had seen plenty of suffering in his 30 years, had ridden through enough tragedy to fill a dozen lifetimes, but holding this woman as she wept against him felt different, personal. As though fate had led his horse to balk at precisely this spot for a reason he did not yet understand. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Delilah," she managed between ragged breaths. "Delilah Thompson." "Ethan McCready," he replied. "And Miss Thompson, I am going to get you to a doctor." She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with those remarkable eyes. "My family," she said. "My parents, my brother. They were all in the house when it started. I was in the kitchen and the floor gave way beneath me and I fell into the crawlspace. I could hear them screaming. I could hear them and I could not help them." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had suspected as much when he saw no other survivors, but hearing her confirm it made the tragedy real in a way that sent a chill through him despite the oppressive heat. "I am so sorry," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They are dead, are they not? Delilah asked, though it was clear she already knew the answer. Yes, Ethan said, because she deserved the truth. I am sorry. She sagged against him again, and this time he simply held her, letting her grief pour out while the sun beat down on the scorched earth around them. He did not know how long they stayed like that, but eventually her sobs quieted to exhausted hiccups, and her body went limp with spent emotion. We need to get you to town, Ethan said. You need medical attention. Delilah did not argue as he lifted her in his arms and carried her to his horse. The animal had calmed now, standing patiently as Ethan mounted with Delilah cradled against his chest. She rested her head on his shoulder as they began the ride toward Lano, and within minutes she had fallen into an uneasy sleep. The town of Lano sat along the Lano River in the heart of Texas Hill Country, a growing community of ranchers, merchants, and those seeking new opportunities in the expanding West. Ethan had been passing through on his way to deliver a herd of cattle to Austin when he stumbled upon Delilah. Now those plans seemed distant and unimportant compared to the woman in his arms. He rode straight to the office of Dr. Samuel Winters, a competent physician who had set up practice in Lano 5 years prior. The doctor took one look at Delilah and immediately cleared his examination table, gesturing for Ethan to lay her down. What happened? Dr. Winters asked, already examining the burns on her arms. Fire at the Thompson ranch, Ethan explained. She was trapped under the floorboards. Been there for 3 days, near as I can tell. The doctor whistled low. 3 days without water in this heat. She is fortunate you found her when you did. He looked at Ethan over his spectacles. You can wait outside, Mr. McCready. This will take some time. Ethan hesitated, oddly reluctant to leave Delilah with someone else, even a doctor. But he nodded and stepped out into the afternoon sun, settling himself on the bench outside the office. He rolled a cigarette and smoked it slowly, watching the townspeople go about their business. A couple walked past, the woman laughing at something her companion said. A group of children chased each other down the dusty street, life continuing on, oblivious to the tragedy that had befallen one of their own. It was nearly sunset when Dr. Winters emerged, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. She will recover, he said, and Ethan felt relief flood through him. Dehydrated, malnourished, some burns that will scar but nothing life-threatening. The real damage is what I cannot see. She lost her entire family, you said, parents and a brother, Ethan confirmed. Then she will need more than medical attention, the doctor said quietly. She will need a place to stay, people to support her. Does she have other family in the area? Ethan realized he had no idea. I did not ask. I will keep her here tonight for observation, Dr. Winters said. But tomorrow she will need somewhere to go. The Reverend and Mrs. Patterson might be willing to take her in temporarily. Can I see her? Ethan asked. The doctor studied him for a long moment before nodding. She is awake. Just do not tire her out. Ethan found Delilah propped up on pillows, her arms bandaged and her face cleaned of the soot that had caked it. She looked younger now, vulnerable in a way that made him want to protect her from any further harm. Mr. McCready, she said, her voice still hoarse but stronger than before. Thank you for saving my life. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. No thanks needed. I am just glad I found you when I did. The doctor said you probably saved me from dying of thirst down there, Delilah continued. I had been trying to scream for help, but my voice gave out yesterday. I thought I would die alone in the dark. You did not, Ethan said firmly, and you are going to recover fully. Delilah looked down at her bandaged hands. I do not have anywhere to go, she said softly. The house is gone. Everything is gone. I have an aunt in San Antonio, but I have no money for the stage and no way to contact her." Ethan made a decision without fully thinking it through. "You will stay in Lano until you are well enough to travel," he said. "I will make sure you have what you need." She met his eyes, and he saw both gratitude and wariness there. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Ethan said simply. "And because you are not a stranger anymore. We are friends now, Delilah Thompson." A faint smile crossed her lips, the first he had seen from her. "Friends," she repeated, as though testing the word. "I suppose we are." They talked for a while longer, Ethan learning that Delilah had grown up on the ranch, that she loved to read, that she had dreams of seeing the ocean someday. She learned that he had been working as a drover for the past decade, moving cattle across Texas and into Kansas, that he had no permanent home, no family waiting for him anywhere, that he had been thinking lately about settling down but had not found a reason good enough to make him stop wandering. When the doctor finally insisted Delilah needed rest, Ethan took a room at the boarding house and spent the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about green eyes and a smile that had somehow lodged itself in his chest. The next morning, he went to see Reverend Patterson, a kindly man with gray hair and a gentle manner. The Reverend and his wife agreed immediately to take Delilah in once she was released from the doctor's care. "We heard about the fire," Mrs. Patterson said, her eyes misting with tears. "Such a tragedy. Of course we will help the poor girl." Ethan also made arrangements with the local undertaker to give the Thompson family a proper burial. He paid for it out of his own pocket, money he had been saving for a piece of land he had been considering near San Marcos. The cattle delivery could wait a few more days. When he told Delilah about the arrangements, she wept again, but these were tears of gratitude mixed with grief. "I cannot repay you for all this," she said. "I do not expect you to," Ethan replied, taking her hand carefully to avoid the bandages. "Just get well. That is payment enough." She squeezed his fingers gently. "I do not understand you, Ethan McCready. Most men would have ridden on after pulling me out, would have done their good deed and left me to sort out the rest on my own." "I am not most men," Ethan said, surprising himself with the words. "No," Delilah agreed, her eyes searching his face. "You are not." The funeral was held 2 days later. The entire town turned out, though many of them had known the Thompson family only in passing. Ethan stood beside Delilah throughout the service, his presence a steady anchor as she said goodbye to her parents and younger brother. She did not cry during the ceremony, her face set in stoic acceptance, but when they lowered the coffins into the ground, she swayed slightly and Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her. "Thank you," she whispered for what felt like the 100th time since he had found her. After the funeral, Delilah moved into the Patterson home, a comfortable house on the edge of town with a spare room that Mrs. Patterson had prepared with fresh linens and wildflowers in a vase by the window. Ethan visited every day, bringing her books from the general store, helping with chores around the house that the aging Reverend struggled with, and simply sitting with her when she needed company. They fell into an easy rhythm over the following weeks. Ethan found work at a nearby ranch, breaking horses and mending fences, anything to keep him in Lano. He told himself it was just until Delilah was well enough to travel to San Antonio. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks stretched toward a month, he had to admit the truth. He was staying because of her. Delilah healed slowly, both physically and emotionally. The burns on her arms scarred but faded, and her voice returned to its normal timbre. The nightmares came less frequently. And gradually, something else began to grow between her and Ethan, something neither of them had been looking for but could not deny. It started with small things. The way her face brightened when he arrived at the Patterson home. The way his day felt incomplete if he did not see her. The accidental brush of fingers that lingered longer than necessary. The conversations that stretched late into the evening, covering everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Delilah said, "I wrote to my aunt in San Antonio." Ethan felt his stomach drop, though he kept his expression neutral. "What did she say?" "She invited me to come live with her," Delilah said quietly. "She runs a boarding house and could use the help. She said she would send money for the stage." "That is good," Ethan said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "You will have family again. A fresh start." Delilah turned to look at him, and in the fading light her eyes seemed to see straight through him. "Is that what you want, for me to go to San Antonio?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ethan could have deflected, could have said something non-committal about her needing to do what was best for her, but he had never been good at lying, especially not to himself. "No," he said honestly. "It is not what I want." "What do you want?" Delilah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stood and moved to the porch railing, gripping it hard enough that his knuckles turned white. "I want you to stay," he said. "I want to see you every day. I want to make you smile, to chase away your nightmares, to build something real and lasting with you. But I have no right to ask that of you. You have been through hell, lost everything. The last thing you need is some drifter cowboy complicating your life further." He heard her stand, felt her approach, and then her hand was on his arm, turning him to face her. "You are not some drifter cowboy," she said fiercely. "You are the man who saved my life, the man who has been by my side every day since. The man who makes me feel like maybe someday I could be whole again." "Delilah," he breathed, and then she was in his arms, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. They broke apart breathless, foreheads pressed together. "I love you," Ethan said, the words spilling out unchecked. "I know it is too soon, too fast, but I cannot help it. I love you." "It is not too soon," Delilah said, cupping his face in her hands. "I love you too. I think I have since you pulled me from that darkness and held me like I was something precious." They kissed again, longer this time, pouring weeks of restrained emotion into the embrace. When they finally separated, Ethan asked, "So you will stay?" "I will stay," Delilah confirmed. "But Ethan, I have nothing. No money, no property, everything burned with the ranch." "We will figure it out together," Ethan promised. "I have some savings. It is not much, but it is a start. We could find a place of our own, build a life here." Delilah smiled, and it transformed her face, chasing away the lingering shadows of grief. "Together," she agreed. Reverend Patterson married them in early September, with Mrs. Patterson crying happy tears in the front pew and half the town in attendance. Delilah wore a simple dress that the women of Lano had sewn together as a wedding gift, white cotton with delicate embroidery along the cuffs and collar. Ethan wore his best shirt and a new vest he had purchased for the occasion. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed his bride with all the tenderness and passion in his heart, and the congregation erupted in applause. They moved into a small house on the outskirts of town, a modest structure with 2 rooms and a covered porch that Ethan rented with an option to buy. It was not much, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Married life agreed with them both. Delilah took in sewing and laundry to contribute to their income, her skill with a needle quickly earning her a reputation for quality work. Ethan continued working at the ranch, saving every penny he could toward buying their rental house outright. The nightmares still came for Delilah sometimes, dreams of fire and smoke and voices calling out that she could not reach. But now when she woke gasping and terrified, Ethan was there to hold her, to stroke her hair and murmur reassurances until her breathing calmed and she drifted back to sleep. They talked often about her family, about the guilt she carried for surviving when they had not. "It is not fair that I am here happy and in love while they are gone," she confessed one night. "Life is rarely fair," Ethan said gently. "But I do not think your parents would want you to spend your life feeling guilty for surviving. They would want you to live fully, to find joy where you can." "How did you become so wise?" Delilah asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. "Years of hard living and harder lessons," Ethan replied with a wry smile. "And a good woman who makes me want to be better than I am." As autumn painted the hill country in shades of gold and rust, Delilah began to feel truly settled for the first time since the fire. The scars on her arms had faded to pale lines, and while she would never forget what she had lost, the pain had dulled to a manageable ache. She had Ethan and their home, and a community that had embraced her as one of their own. It was more than she had dared hope for in those dark hours beneath the floorboards. In November, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan over dinner, nervous about his reaction despite knowing he would be thrilled. She had barely gotten the words out before he was up from his chair, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around the small kitchen. "We are having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Delilah, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his joy was evident. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ethan said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "This is everything I never knew I wanted." They spent that evening making plans, talking about names and where the baby would sleep, and all the things they would need to prepare. Ethan became even more determined to buy their house, working extra hours and taking on additional jobs around town. He wanted his child to have a real home, a place of stability and safety. By Christmas, Ethan had saved enough to make an offer on the house, and the landlord accepted. They signed the papers in the new year of 1879, and Delilah cried happy tears as Ethan carried her over the threshold of their very own home. "This is ours," she said, looking around the familiar rooms with fresh eyes. "Really ours." "Ours," Ethan confirmed, kissing her forehead. "A place for our family to grow." Winter gave way to spring, and Delilah's belly swelled with their growing child. She sewed baby clothes while Ethan built a cradle, working on it every evening after he came home from the ranch. It was rough work, his carpentry skills being limited, but he poured his heart into every nail and board. "It is perfect," Delilah said when he showed her the finished cradle, running her hand along the smooth wood. "The baby will be here soon," Ethan said, placing his hand beside hers. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," Delilah admitted. "But also excited. We are creating a life, Ethan, a new beginning from the ashes of the old." He pulled her close, mindful of her protruding belly. "You are the strongest woman I know. You survived the impossible. You will get through this too." Their son was born in late May, a healthy baby with a lusty cry and his father's dark hair. They named him William, after Delilah's father, and Thomas for his middle name, after her brother. Ethan held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the tiny, perfect life cradled in his arms. "Hello, William," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise to protect you and love you every day of your life." Delilah watched from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "He looks like you," she said. "He has your nose," Ethan countered, gently touching the baby's face. Being parents transformed them both in ways they had not anticipated. Sleepless nights were made bearable by the weight of William in their arms. The endless work of caring for an infant was offset by the joy of watching him grow and change daily. Ethan found himself reluctant to leave for work each morning, wanting to stay and witness every moment of his son's life. As William grew from infant to toddler, Delilah and Ethan's love deepened and matured. They had weathered tragedy and emerged stronger, bound together by shared experience and genuine affection. The physical attraction that had sparked between them that first day had evolved into something richer and more profound, a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. When William was 2 years old, Delilah became pregnant again. This time there was less nervousness and more quiet anticipation. They knew what to expect, felt confident in their abilities as parents. Their daughter arrived in the winter of 1881, a tiny thing with wispy blonde hair and her mother's green eyes. They named her Grace, because that was what she felt like, an additional blessing in a life already full of them. 2 children, Ethan said, holding Grace while William played at his feet. Our family is complete. Is it? Delilah asked with a knowing smile. You might change your mind in a few years. She was right. Over the next decade, 2 more children joined the McCready household. Another son they named Samuel, and finally a daughter they called Rose. Their small house burst at the seams with love and laughter, and the organized chaos of raising 4 children. Ethan eventually bought a small ranch of his own, just outside of Llano, using money he had saved and a loan from the bank. It was modest compared to the sprawling cattle operations in other parts of Texas, but it was enough to support his family and give his children room to grow. He raised horses primarily, breeding and training them for sale to ranchers and the cavalry. Delilah managed the household with efficiency and grace, teaching her daughters to sew and cook, while instilling in all her children the value of education and hard work. She never forgot where she had come from, the family she had lost, and she made sure her children knew the stories of their grandparents and uncle who had perished in the fire. On the anniversary of the fire each year, Delilah and Ethan would ride out to the old Thompson property. The ruins had long since been cleared away, and grass had reclaimed the scorched earth. They would stand together in silence, remembering the tragedy that had brought them together, honoring the dead while celebrating the life they had built from that darkness. You ever regret it? Delilah asked one year as they stood in the field where her childhood home had once stood. Taking on a stranger with nothing but grief and scars, Ethan looked at his wife, still beautiful after years of marriage and motherhood, and shook his head. Never. Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah. You and our children, this life we have built together. If I could go back and change that day, the only thing I would change is finding you sooner, so you did not have to suffer as long. She leaned into him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. I think about them less now, she said quietly. My parents, my brother. Sometimes that makes me feel guilty, like I am forgetting them. You are not forgetting them, Ethan assured her. You are healing. There is a difference. And you keep their memory alive through our children, through the stories you tell and the values you teach. They live on in William and Grace and Samuel and Rose. When did you become such a philosopher? Delilah asked, tilting her head to look up at him. I had a good teacher, Ethan said, kissing her temple. A woman who taught me that surviving is not enough. You have to live, truly live, or the tragedy wins. They rode back to their ranch as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in brilliant colors. Their children ran to meet them. William, now a gangly teenager, helping his father with the horses. Grace becoming a young woman with her mother's beauty and strength. Samuel and Rose still young enough to cling to their parents' legs and demand attention. That night, after the children were in bed, Ethan and Delilah sat on their porch much as they had done on the night they first confessed their love. The years had added comfortable silence to their relationship, the ability to simply be together without needing to fill every moment with words. "I love you," Delilah said eventually, breaking the quiet. "I do not say it enough, but I do, more than I can express." "I know," Ethan said, taking her hand. "I love you too, every day more than the day before. Even when I am exhausted and snappish and the house is a disaster because 4 children are apparently determined to destroy everything they touch," Delilah asked with a laugh. "Especially then," Ethan said seriously, "because you handle it all with such grace and strength. Because you make our house a home. Because every challenge we face together." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The years continued to pass, as years do. William grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over much of the daily operation of the ranch. He married a sweet girl from town named Margaret, and they gave Ethan and Delilah their first grandchildren. Grace followed her heart to teaching, opening a small school in Lano and shaping young minds with the same patience her mother had shown her. Samuel showed an aptitude for working with horses that surpassed even his father's. And Rose, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by becoming interested in medicine after helping Dr. Winters treat a ranch hand's injury. Ethan and Delilah aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. The physical passion that had ignited between them never fully faded, but it was complemented now by a profound emotional intimacy, the kind that comes from truly knowing another person and being fully known in return. They celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren, a rowdy gathering filled with laughter and love. Reverend Patterson, now quite elderly but still sharp of mind, offered a toast to the couple he had married 2 decades earlier. "I have performed many weddings in my time," he said, his voice wavering but strong. "But few have brought me as much joy as joining Ethan and Delilah. Theirs is a love forged in hardship and tempered by time, and it stands as a testament to the power of the human heart to heal and hope." After the guests had departed and the house was quiet again, Delilah and Ethan sat together on their porch, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. 20 years, Delilah mused. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I remember the day I found you like it was yesterday," Ethan said. "You were so small and broken, and I knew in that moment that my life would never be the same. You held me so gently," Delilah recalled, "like I was made of glass and might shatter at any moment. I had lost everything, but in your arms I felt safe. I felt like maybe I could survive after all." "We both survived," Ethan said. "But more than that, we lived. We built this life together, raised our children, created something lasting and good." Delilah looked out at the ranch, at the house they had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, at the corrals where their horses grazed peacefully in the moonlight. "I never imagined I could be this happy again," she said. "After the fire, I thought I had used up all my happiness, that the rest of my life would be defined by loss. And now," Ethan prompted. "Now I know that grief and joy can coexist," Delilah said. "I will always carry the sorrow of losing my first family, but it does not diminish the love I have for you and our children. If anything, that loss makes me appreciate what we have even more." Ethan pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the crickets chirping and the distant call of an owl. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Delilah asked. "In the crawl space before you lifted me out, I said I had got you," Ethan recalled. "That you just needed to hold on a moment longer. You kept that promise, Delilah said softly. For 20 years, through everything, you have had me. You have never let me fall. I never will, Ethan promised, kissing the top of her head. As they entered their third decade together, health issues began to crop up as they inevitably do with age. Ethan developed arthritis in his hands, making the physical work of the ranch more difficult. Delilah's eyesight began to fail, forcing her to give up the detailed sewing work she had done for years. But they adapted, learning new rhythms and accepting help from their children when pride would have once made them refuse. William ran the ranch now, with Samuel as his right hand. The two brothers worked well together, expanding the operation and earning a reputation for producing some of the finest horses in Central Texas. Grace's school had grown to serve nearly 40 students, and she had married a banker from Austin, though she refused to leave Leno and her family. Rose had gone east to study medicine formally, a shocking choice for a woman in the 1890s, but she had her mother's determination and her father's stubborn streak. On a warm afternoon in the spring of 1899, Ethan and Delilah took a rare moment to ride out to the old Thompson property. They were both in their 60s now, moving more slowly than they once had, but still capable of making the short journey. The land had changed significantly over the years. A new family had built a house on the property, a young couple with small children who reminded Delilah painfully of her own parents decades earlier. She had sold them the land years ago, unable to bear the thought of it sitting empty, but also unable to rebuild there herself. I used to come here and feel only sadness, Delilah said as they sat on their horses, looking at the thriving homestead. But now I see life continuing, a new family making memories where mine ended, and it feels right somehow. The circle of life, Ethan said. Ending and beginning, all woven together. I am glad I survived, Delilah said suddenly, turning to look at her husband. There were times in those first months and even years when I wished I had died with my family. The guilt was crushing, but I am so glad I lived. I am glad I got to love you, to raise our children, to see our grandchildren. My parents and brother would want that for me. They would be proud of you, Ethan said with certainty. Of the woman you became, the mother, the wife. You took your tragedy and transformed it into something beautiful. They rode home slowly, savoring the spring warmth and each other's company. That evening, their children and grandchildren descended on the ranch for Sunday dinner, a tradition that had developed over the years. The house rang with noise and laughter. 3 generations of McCreadys gathered around a table laden with food. Ethan sat at the head of the table with Delilah at his right hand, watching his family with deep satisfaction. William was discussing horse breeding with Samuel while Margaret tended to their youngest, a baby boy named Ethan after his grandfather. Grace was helping Rose, home on a rare visit from her medical studies, explain to the younger grandchildren what it meant to be a doctor. The scene was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. "What are you thinking?" Delilah asked quietly, noticing the expression on her husband's face. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Ethan replied honestly. "That every choice I made, every road I traveled, led me to that burned house where I found you, and I would make every choice again exactly the same way." Delilah squeezed his hand under the table. "We were lucky," she agreed, "to find each other when we did, to build all this together." After dinner, while the women cleaned up and the children played outside, Ethan gathered his sons on the porch. At 63, he was beginning to feel the weight of his years, and there were conversations that needed to happen. "I want you boys to know that this ranch, everything your mother and I built, it is yours now," he said without preamble. "We have already drawn up the papers with the lawyer. When we are gone, it will be split between all 4 of you children equally. "Father, you are not going anywhere for a long time yet," William protested, but Ethan held up a hand. "None of us know how long we have," he said. "I learned that the day I found your mother. Life is precious and uncertain, and I want to make sure everything is in order. This ranch has been our life's work, and I want to see it continue through you and your children." Samuel cleared his throat, clearly emotional. "You and Mother gave us everything," he said. "Not just the ranch, but a home, a family, values to live by. We will honor that legacy." "I know you will," Ethan said, pride evident in his voice. "You are good men, both of you. Your mother and I could not be prouder." As the sun set and the family began to depart, each child and grandchild hugged Ethan and Delilah goodbye with extra warmth, as though sensing that these moments were becoming more precious. Alone again, Ethan and Delilah prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routine they had shared for decades. Delilah brushed out her hair, now more silver than brown, while Ethan removed his boots with a grunt of relief. "My bones are not what they used to be," he complained good-naturedly. "None of us are what we used to be," Delilah replied, setting down her brush. "But I think we have aged rather well, all things considered." Ethan looked at his wife in the lamplight and saw not the lines and gray hair, but the young woman he had pulled from beneath the floorboards, the bride who had walked down the aisle toward him, the mother cradling their newborn children, the partner who had stood beside him through every joy and sorrow. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said sincerely. Delilah laughed, a sound that still made his heart skip. "And you are still a terrible liar, but I love you for it." They climbed into bed, Ethan's arms automatically wrapping around Delilah as she nestled against his chest. This was how they had slept for 21 years, finding comfort in proximity and touch. "Ethan," Delilah said softly into the darkness. "Yes, love. Thank you for pulling me free that day, for holding me close, for never letting go." "Thank you for holding on," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "For choosing to live, for choosing me." "Always you," Delilah whispered. "In this life and whatever comes next, always you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their home in one another. The years continued their relentless march forward. Ethan developed a persistent cough that worried Delilah, though Dr. Winters, now retired and replaced by a younger physician, assured them it was common in men who had worked outdoors their entire lives. Delilah's joints ached more frequently, making her daily tasks more difficult, but she refused to slow down completely. They celebrated their 25th anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their children. The grandchildren were numerous now, 8 in total with more on the way. The McCready family had become a fixture in Leno, respected and beloved by the community. Rose had completed her medical training and returned to Texas, setting up practice in Austin but visiting Leno frequently. She had fallen in love with a fellow doctor, a kind man who supported her career, and they married in a simple ceremony that Delilah and Ethan attended with joy. "All our children are settled and happy," Delilah observed one evening as she and Ethan rocked on their porch. "We did well by them." "We did," Ethan agreed. "They are good people, all of them, strong and capable and kind." "They get that from their father," Delilah said with a smile. "And their mother," Ethan countered. "You have always been their moral compass, their example of grace under pressure." As they approached their 30th anniversary in 1909, both Ethan and Delilah were showing the clear signs of aging. Ethan walked with a cane now, his arthritis having progressed to the point where his mobility was limited. Delilah's hearing had deteriorated, forcing Ethan to speak louder and more clearly for her to understand him. But their love had not dimmed. If anything, The knowledge that their time together was growing shorter made every moment more precious. For their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a large celebration, inviting the entire town of Llano. The party was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. Music played, children ran wild, and Ethan and Delilah sat in places of honor, accepting well wishes and congratulations from friends and neighbors. 30 years married to the same woman, one of Ethan's old ranching friends said with a laugh. That is an achievement worth celebrating. Best 30 years of my life, Ethan said simply, looking at Delilah with undisguised affection. When the dancing began, Ethan stood with effort and extended his hand to Delilah. "May I have this dance, Mrs. McCready?" "I would be honored, Mr. McCready," Delilah replied, taking his hand and allowing him to lead her to the cleared space serving as a dance floor. They moved slowly, more swaying than actual dancing, but they were lost in each other and the music. Their children watched with tears in their eyes, seeing the depth of devotion their parents still held for one another after 3 decades. "This is what love looks like," Grace whispered to her husband. "Growing old together but still choosing each other every single day." As the song ended, Ethan pulled Delilah close and kissed her gently. The crowd erupted in applause and they laughed together, embarrassed and pleased in equal measure. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, William approached his parents with a gift. "We all went in on this together," he said, handing them a wrapped package. Inside was a beautiful photograph in an ornate frame. It showed Ethan and Delilah on their wedding day, an image Delilah had forgotten existed until the photographer's widow had found it in her late husband's collection. They looked impossibly young, Delilah radiant in her simple dress and Ethan handsome in his vest, their eyes shining with love and hope for the future. "Oh," Delilah breathed, touching the glass gently. "I remember this day like it was yesterday." "The beginning of everything," Ethan said, his arm around her shoulders. "Not the beginning," Delilah corrected softly. "The beginning was when you pulled me from the darkness. The wedding was just when we made it official." That night, after everyone had left and the ranch was quiet again, Ethan and Delilah sat on their porch one more time, the framed photograph resting on Delilah's lap. 30 years, Ethan mused. "Where did the time go?" "Into building a life," Delilah said. "Into raising children and running a ranch and loving each other through every season." "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" Ethan asked, a question he had never posed before. Delilah considered carefully. "I would save my family if I could," she said honestly. "The guilt of surviving them has never fully left me, even after all these years. But I would not change meeting you, marrying you, our life together. So no, I suppose I would not change anything. Even the tragedy led me to you, and you have been worth every moment of pain that came before." "I feel the same," Ethan said quietly. "Every hard thing I endured, every lonely night on the trail, every disappointment and setback, it all led me to ride past your ranch at exactly the right moment. I would not trade that for anything." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, two people who had walked through fire and emerged stronger together. The winter of 1910 was particularly harsh in Central Texas. Ethan's cough worsened, developing into a lung infection that left him bedridden for weeks. Delilah nursed him tirelessly, sitting by his bedside and reading to him when he could not sleep, holding his hand and telling him stories of their life together. "You remember the day William was born?" she asked one afternoon as snow fell softly outside their window, a rare sight in Llano. "How could I forget?" Ethan said, his voice rough from coughing. "I thought my heart might burst from how much I loved you both in that moment. You cried, Delilah recalled with a soft smile. I am not ashamed to admit it, Ethan said. Meeting my son for the first time, seeing you so strong and beautiful after bringing him into the world, it was the most powerful moment of my life. Second most powerful, Delilah corrected gently. The most powerful was when you chose to stay in Lano for me, when you chose me. Ethan squeezed her hand weakly. Every day since, I have thanked God for leading me to you. Even now, sick and old and useless, I am grateful for every moment we have had together. You are not useless, Delilah said fiercely. You are the man I love, the father of my children, the partner of my heart. That will never change, no matter how many years pass or what illnesses we face. Ethan recovered slowly from the lung infection, though it left him weaker than before. He could no longer help with the ranch work, a loss that chafed at his pride even as he understood the necessity. William and Samuel ran the operation smoothly, consulting their father on major decisions, but handling the day-to-day operations themselves. Spring came, and with it renewed energy for both Ethan and Delilah. They spent their days sitting in the sun, watching their grandchildren play and reminiscing about their life together. Delilah started writing down the family stories, wanting to preserve them for future generations who would not have the privilege of knowing their grandparents personally. Tell me again how we met, their youngest granddaughter, Clara, begged one afternoon. She was 7 years old and loved romantic stories. Delilah glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. Well, she began, there was a terrible fire at my family's ranch. I was trapped beneath the floorboards, unable to escape, and I thought I was going to die there all alone. Clara's eyes were wide. But grandfather saved you. He did, Delilah confirmed. He was riding past and heard me calling for help. He pulled me free from that dark place and held me close, and I knew in that moment that everything would be all right. Because you loved him, Clara asked. Not yet, Delilah said with a laugh. Love came later, but I trusted him, and that was the beginning. And then you fell in love and got married and had babies, Clara recited, having heard the story many times before. Exactly right, Ethan said, reaching over to ruffle his granddaughter's hair. And those babies grew up and had babies of their own, which is why we have wonderful grandchildren like you. Clara beamed at this, then ran off to play, satisfied with the story for now. She will tell that story to her children someday, Delilah observed. Our great-grandchildren will know how we met. A legacy, Ethan said. Not just in children and land, but in stories and love passed down through generations. As summer faded into autumn of 1911, both Ethan and Delilah felt the weight of their years more heavily. They had lived full, rich lives, but the end was approaching, a truth neither spoke aloud but both understood. One crisp October evening, as they sat on their porch wrapped in blankets against the chill, Delilah said, I am not afraid of dying. Ethan looked at her in surprise. Where did that come from? I have been thinking about it, Delilah admitted. We are both in our 70s now. We have lived longer than many people do, and we have lived well. When my time comes, I will face it without fear because I have had a beautiful life with you. I do not want to think about losing you, Ethan said roughly. We will not lose each other, Delilah said with certainty. Whatever comes after this life, I believe we will be together. We have loved too deeply, been too connected, for death to truly separate us. Ethan pulled her closer, and they sat in silence, watching the sun set over the ranch they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their enduring love. Their 32nd anniversary came and went quietly, celebrated with their immediate family in a small gathering. Both Ethan and Delilah were slowing down noticeably, napping more frequently and tiring easily. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other never wavered, On a mild spring day in 1912, Ethan suggested they take a ride out to the old Thompson property one last time. William helped them saddle gentle horses, and they made the journey slowly, stopping frequently to rest. The land was thriving under the care of the family who owned it now. The house was larger than the original, with a barn and outbuildings that spoke of prosperity. Children played in the yard and smoke rose cheerfully from the chimney. "Life continues," Delilah said softly. "Even after tragedy, even after loss, life finds a way to continue." "You were the proof of that," Ethan said. "You survived the impossible and built something beautiful from the ashes." "We built it together," Delilah corrected. "I could not have done any of it without you." They sat on their horses for a long time, saying goodbye to the past and making peace with the future. When they finally turned for home, they rode close together, their legs occasionally brushing, maintaining physical contact as they had throughout their marriage. That night, as they prepared for bed, Delilah was unusually quiet. Ethan noticed but did not press, allowing her the space to work through whatever was troubling her. Finally, as they lay in bed, she said, "I want you to know that you gave me everything I could have hoped for in a life. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You loved me when I was broken and helped me become whole again. You gave me children and grandchildren, a home, a purpose. You are the greatest gift I have ever received." Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. "And you gave me a reason to stop wandering. You gave me a home, not just a place but a person to come home to. You made me better than I would have been alone. I love you more than words can express." Delilah McCready. They held each other close, two souls intertwined, and fell asleep wrapped in the security of their mutual devotion. Delilah passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 months later, on a warm summer night with the windows open and a gentle breeze stirring the curtains. Ethan woke to find her still and quiet beside him, her face serene, and he knew immediately that she was gone. He did not call for help right away. Instead, he lay beside his wife of 33 years, holding her hand and talking to her, telling her all the things he had said 1,000 times before, but needed to say once more. He thanked her for choosing life when she could have given up. He thanked her for loving him, for building a family with him, for every laugh and tear and moment they had shared. When the sun rose, he finally called for William, and their children gathered to mourn their mother and support their father. The funeral was attended by the entire town of Lano and people from miles around, a testament to the woman Delilah had been and the impact she had made on her community. Ethan stood at her graveside, stoic and dignified, as they lowered her coffin into the ground. He placed a single wildflower on top, a Texas bluebonnet, her favorite. "Until we meet again, my love," he whispered. The grief was crushing, a physical weight that made breathing difficult. For weeks after Delilah's death, Ethan moved through his days like a ghost, going through the motions but feeling hollow inside. His children worried about him, taking turns staying at the ranch to keep him company, but Ethan insisted he was fine. "I am just tired," he told them, and it was true. He was tired of living without her, tired of waking to an empty bed, tired of the silence where her laughter used to be. As autumn approached, Ethan's health began to decline rapidly. He stopped eating properly, stopped engaging with his grandchildren the way he once had. Dr. Martinez, Rose's husband, examined him and found nothing specifically wrong, but the diagnosis was clear. Ethan was dying of a broken heart. "Fight this, Father," William pleaded. "We need you. Your grandchildren need you." "I have fought," Ethan said gently. "For 74 years, I have fought against everything life threw at me. But I am tired, son, and I miss your mother. I am ready to rest." The family gathered at the ranch as Ethan's condition worsened. He spent most of his time in bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking to Delilah as though she were there in the room with him. On a clear October morning, Ethan opened his eyes with sudden clarity. His children were gathered around his bed, along with several of his grandchildren. He looked at each of them in turn, seeing Delilah's features echoed in their faces, her strength and grace passed down through the generations. "I am so proud of all of you," he said, his voice weak but certain. "Live well, love deeply, take care of each other." "We love you, Father," Grace said through her tears. "I love you too," Ethan replied. "All of you, you are my greatest achievement, the legacy your mother and I leave behind." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Ethan closed his eyes one final time. His last thought was of Delilah, of pulling her from the darkness beneath those floorboards and holding her close. He had saved her that day, but she had saved him too, in ways he was only now fully understanding. Together, they had transformed tragedy into triumph, building a love that would outlast their mortal lives. He breathed out slowly and did not breathe in again. Ethan McCready was buried beside his beloved Delilah in the Leno Cemetery, their headstones side by side as they had been in life. The inscription on his stone reads simply, "Loving husband, devoted father, faithful friend, together again with his Delilah." The McCready Ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of William and Samuel, and eventually their children after them. Grace's school educated hundreds of students over the decades, shaping the minds of future generations. Rose became one of the most respected physicians in Austin, breaking barriers for women in medicine. And on quiet evenings, when the McCready descendants gathered on the porch of the ranch house, they would tell the story of how it all began. With a fire, a rescue, and two people who found in each other the strength to not just survive, but to truly live. They spoke of Ethan pulling Delilah free from beneath the floorboards of her burned home, of how he held her close and never let go. They spoke of a love that transcended tragedy, that built something lasting and beautiful from the ashes of loss. The story became legend in Leno, passed down through generations as an example of the power of compassion, courage, and love. Children who never knew Ethan and Delilah McCready knew their names, knew what they had overcome, knew the legacy they had left behind. Years turned into decades, and the 20th century marched forward with all its changes and upheavals. The ranch adapted and evolved, but it remained in McCready hands, a living monument to the couple who had founded it. The house was expanded and modernized, but the porch where Ethan and Delilah had spent so many evenings remained unchanged. A sacred space where family members still gathered to talk and watch the sunset. On the 100th anniversary of Ethan and Delilah's wedding, their great-great-grandchildren organized a celebration at the ranch. Dozens of McCready descendants attended, representing 5 generations of the family tree that had grown from 2 people who defied tragedy to create something extraordinary. One of the oldest attendees, Clara, now in her 90s herself, stood before the crowd and told the story she had first heard at her grandmother Delilah's knee. Her voice wavered with age but remained strong with conviction as she described the fire, the rescue, the love that had blossomed from disaster. "They taught us that hope can be found even in the darkest moments," Clara said. "That love is not just a feeling but a choice, made over and over again through the years. They showed us how to build a legacy not of wealth or fame, but of family and devotion. We are all here because Ethan McCready chose to stop when he heard a cry for help. Because Delilah Thompson chose to live when it would have been easier to give up. Because 2 people found each other and held on tight, through everything life threw at them." As the sun set over the ranch that evening, bathing the Texas landscape in golden light. The assembled family raised their glasses in a toast to the couple who had started it all. The names Ethan and Delilah McCready were spoken with reverence and love, and for a moment it felt as though they were there among their descendants, still holding hands, still choosing each other, still demonstrating what true love looks like. In the Leno Cemetery, wildflowers grew between their headstones, planted by family members who made sure the graves were always tended, always beautiful. And if you visited on a quiet day, when the wind blew just right, you could almost hear the echo of laughter, the whisper of promises kept, the enduring evidence of two lives lived fully and together. Their story did not end with their deaths. It lived on in every McCready who chose love over fear, who showed compassion to strangers, who built rather than destroyed. It lived on in the values they had instilled in their children and their children's children. It lived on in the very land itself, in the ranch that bore their name and the town that remembered their contributions. Ethan and Delilah McCready had been granted no guarantees when they found each other in the aftermath of tragedy. They had no way of knowing if their love would last, if they would build a life together, if their names would be remembered generations later. But they had chosen to try, to open their hearts to possibility, to believe that even from the greatest loss could come profound joy. And they had been right. From the ashes of the Thompson ranch, from the darkness beneath those burned floorboards, from a moment of compassion and courage, had grown a love story that transcended time. A testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of connection, to the truth that we are never truly alone as long as we allow ourselves to be found. Theirs was a love that saved, that healed, that endured. It was a love that began with a cowboy pulling a woman free from the ruins of her past and holding her close, and it continued long after both had passed from this world, living on in the hearts and lives of everyone they had touched. And so the story ends where all the best love stories end. Not with death, but with life continuing, with love multiplying, with two souls who found each other against all odds and created something that would last forever. Ethan and Delilah McCready rest together in the Texas soil they loved, but their story lives on, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope endures and love, when nurtured with dedication and care, truly is eternal.